going to start up again with our fourth and penultimate session with AAFC's Christine Nerona, who is here to deliver a deep dive into one of her personal favorite pests, the Colorado potato beetle. So, Christine, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and I would like to thank Potatoes in Canada for inviting me to speak at this summit. So today I'm going to talk about to Colorado potato beetle and the management. Okay, so let's start with history. So the potatoes come from South America. That's where they originated, and then they were distributed all across the world. So now we have potatoes everywhere. The potato beetle, on the other hand, it was first described in 1824, and that was from buffalo boar, which is Solanum rostrum. So that's what it was feeding on. And then as potatoes started to be used in North America and fields started to grow, this beetle moved into the potato crop, and it was not until 1859 was when they started noticing that the amount of damage on in the potato crop. And then slowly the beetle started moving east, and it kept moving east. And as you can see the dates there, in 1870 is when it started, when it got into Canada and Ontario, and now it's spread right across Canada. It also got in 1876 it moved to Europe, and now it's in many European countries as well as in some Asian countries. So it has a worldwide distribution. Um, so the potato beetle, it's a very important insect defoliator of potatoes. That's because both the larva and the adults feed on the leaves as well as on the stems of the potato plants. And the invasion usually happens via either flight or walking. They love to walk. Potato beetles walk a lot. So there's a lot of movement via walking, but there's also some movement by flight, and they're good flyers. We originally thought that they weren't, but they're good flyers. They can fly from 1.5 kilometers, so that's pretty good. The other thing with potato beetles is that the females can lay up to 500 eggs, and these eggs are laid in egg masses over a period of 4 to 5 weeks. So you have different stages in the field. A little bit about the life cycle. So they come out from overwintering. They overwinter underground as adults, and then they'll come out in the spring. And that's when they go searching for potato plants. Um, they find these little tiny, newly emerging potato plants. And this is where they'll start laying their eggs, and they feed on these plants. And sometimes I've seen plants that have been completely defoliated. They're these tiny little plants, but they're completely defoliated, but they come back. Potatoes are quite resilient. At that stage, early in the season, they will come back. But they do defoliate and they lay their eggs, and you can see your little larvae that have just hatched. And these larvae go through four larval instars. Um, Here you see the larval instars. This is the first larva, and this is the fourth larval instar. That's pretty big, and they feed a lot. As they grow, they feed a lot on the leaves, and then they fall off the plant, go underground, and they'll pupate there. Dig a little hole, and they'll pupate underground, and then they come out as adults again. And these are the adults that feed quite voraciously on these plants that are in the field, on the same plants that the larvae were feeding on. They'll start feeding again, and they'll kind of cause a lot of defoliation at that time. And they feed because they're preparing to overwinter. They're collecting fat in their body so that they could overwinter. And when they're ready, they move off out of the fields into the hedgerows, and that's where they will overwinter underground overwinter. Hedgerows are good places because that's where It's warm. A lot of snow collects, so the soil doesn't freeze very deep because there's snow banks that collect in hedgerows, so that's why they go there. Now there's mostly in most places in Canada there's one generation, but there are places where there may be two generations. We do sometimes see a partial second. By partial second, I mean they lay their eggs, the larva will hatch, they will feed, but they won't reach adulthood. They die at the end of the season because it's starting to get cold and they just can't complete their generation. So we do see a partial second or even a full second generation. Now I talked about the hedgerows, and we did this trial in Quebec. This was in 1994, where we put up these traps, these flight traps, and we've in directional flight traps to see where do they really go. And we found that the majority of them moved towards the forest. They flew into the forest, and when we went there we actually could see them on the trees and on the ground, trying walking around trying to find a place to overwinter. So they do move to these forest edges or hedgerows, and that's where they overwinter, because next year we found them coming out from there. So that was a find that we know now where they congregate, where they go, right? Um, so potato beetles can cause a lot of problems for growers if they're not controlled. If the beetles are not controlled, you can have heavy yield loss, and because they feed on the foliage, and in addition to the foliage, they'll also feed on the stems, and sometimes you'll even see them feeding on the tubers. Now, this happens usually at the end of the year, but sometimes even in the spring, you might see them feeding on tubers. But in the at the end of the year, when they're going just before they go to overwinter, you see them feeding. So they can cause quite a lot of problems for growers, because it's not only early in the season, it's the entire season where you have them feeding on these potato plants. So insecticides have been the main focus of control all these years, but the potato beetle is known for developing resistance. It has a long history of developing resistance. And actually, in the late 80s and early 90s, um, we the resistance had developed to the extent that there was a control failure in many regions. Even in Canada, we they just couldn't control these beetles. So there was nothing in the toolbox to use, and that's when researchers and farmers started using other methods to control potato beetles, because there was nothing else. So some of the methods, I'm just going to go through a few of them just to see what was there. And some of the methods were biological control. There's a lot of research being done on Beauveria bassiana, which is an entomopathogen that infects just insects. And so there were studies done on that, and you can see that even for both the adults and the larvae, there was significant levels of control that could be achieved with Beauveria bassiana. So there are lots of papers. If anybody wants to go and look at those papers, there is information out there. The other biological control that researchers have looked at is this soldier bug, which is called Podesis maculiventris. There's another one too, Pyrrhus bioculatus, but Podesis is actually sold. You can actually purchase it. And the nymphs and the adults feed on the larva and the eggs of the potato beetles, but they have to be released in the field. So it takes a lot of time to release these beetles, to put these bugs, soldier bugs, out there. So there is studies that have been done on developing a mechanical prototype that is designed to go into the field and release these bugs. And you can see here that it didn't matter if it was mechanical or manual release of these bugs. This you still got really good control. So there is an option out there for growers to use, and to release these biocontrol agents in the field. Another method that was used as mechanical control method where a plastic line trench was developed and evaluated. And as you can see, this is the plastic line trench, and the slope, the degree of slope of the trench is what keeps the beetles in, because if the slope is not right, they'll be able to crawl out. But if the slope is correct, they will actually be in there. And you can see these little things in here. This is actually potato beetles that are walked out. These are mostly for walking beetles that walk out of the fields. So you can see here with the study that they did, there were significantly lower numbers of beetles on plants that had on the plots that had the trenches beside them as compared to the ones that didn't have the trenches. So this is an option for growers to use. The other option is looking at pneumatic devices, machines. So here you have a it's called a vacuum. It actually vacuums the beetles off the plant. Or there's another device which actually one side you have a fan which blows air onto the plant, and the other side there is a little tray that the beetles get collected in. So that's one device. The other one that they resorted to was flaming, trying to using propane flamers to flame the beetles off the and kill them when they are on these plants. Remember, there was nothing that they could use at that time, so they were looking at all different options. These options are good, but the size of the plant mat is can be an issue. So it usually is much better if the plants are smaller. You don't damage the plants as much, but as you get bigger plants, it's a little bit more difficult to use these devices. So those were the options that everybody came up with because there was resistance, right? Um, so insecticides play a really big role in our integrated pest management strategies. They are a tool that is required in the toolbox. So we need to figure out ways to reduce resistance, the development of resistance, or slow down the development of resistance. I'll just talk about resistance. How does it develop? So in this case, spraying the same class of insecticides repeatedly. Let's say there's an insecticide A and we spray it on a population. These red dots represent resistant individuals. So all the blue dots are susceptible individuals that are killed off, and all you have are these resistant individuals that are left in the field. These resistant individuals are the ones that mate and lay eggs, and they produce the other generation, the next population. So there's a lot more individuals now in your population because those are the only ones that reproduced. A lot more individuals in that population that have resistance. If that insecticide is sprayed again, once again, you're taking out any um, susceptible individuals that are there in the field that have flown in or walked in. However, you're taking all those out, and now all that's left are the ones that are resistant there to reproduce. So the next population is going to be even higher in that resistant higher numbers of resistant individuals. So that's how resistance can develop really quickly from generation to generation. So the aim is actually to reduce that, to slow it down. So one way to slow it down is to rotate between classes of insecticides, not using the name, but the classes of the insecticide. So let's say insecticide A, you spray it, you have it's sprayed, and there is resistant individuals that are left in the field. Now, we go back and spray insecticide B, some of these resistant individuals are probably going to be susceptible to insecticide B, so they're going to be killed off. So you're not going to have as many of the resistant ones left in the field to reproduce for the next population. So that's how we kind of slow it down. There's always some there, but we slow it down. We don't let them reproduce to the extent that they are going to take over the population. So that's one of the ways to reduce and to slow down the development of resistance and keep this tool in the toolbox for as long as we possibly can. So rotation between insecticide classes is the best strategy to delay resistance development. Now, in Canada, several years ago, actually this was published in 2023, so not several years ago, some years ago, they did a study where they looked at the regional differences in susceptibility. They were mostly looking at spinosyn, but they've looked at other um, insecticides as well. And here you can see it's a really important graph, a really good graph, because it looks at neonicotinoids, it used to looks at spinosins, it looks at diamides, and looks at the number of populations that are either susceptible, less susceptible, or resistant, and right across Canada. And you can see here that there's in Alberta there's a lot of there's quite a few. Actually, more than 80% of the population is susceptible. But then when you get to Manitoba, there's less than 20% that are susceptible. But then you have quite a number of populations that are less susceptible, so they are on their way to becoming resistant, and then you have some resistant populations. So this tells us maybe the neonics in certain areas, we should kind of reduce the use of them, so in reduce the widespread use of them. And it's the same for spinosins. You see, there are resistant populations that are developing, and same with the diamides. The diamides in Alberta work perfectly, but in other places, you see there are less susceptible populations. So this just gives us an idea, and it should be used as a tool to figure out how we should try to delay that development of resistance. Now, there's another caveat to all of this, and that is cross resistance. The potato beetle is called a superbug, and the reason for it being called a superbug is because it develops cross resistance. And that's why in the 1980s and 90s we had this resistance to all the insecticides, because sometimes what happens is they develop resistance to one, but they also they are also less susceptible to another chemical. So so they have this cross resistance between the different classes, and this is what makes it such a difficult insect to work with. So here in this study that these scientists did, this research, they found that there was some level of cross resistance between the diamides and the neonicotinoids. It's a low level, but there are starting to see some level of cross resistance that's starting to develop. So this is very important information, and we really need to look at it and use it to make decisions for the future of how this insect is going to be managed in the future. So one of the ways is to try to have a resistance management plan. Like every farm should have a resistance management plan, and though that plan can use some of the other techniques that we have discussed. And when populations get really high, then you hit them with a chemical. So you're not really hitting them repeatedly with chemicals, but when they get high enough, you hit them with this with the chemical. So you use that tool. The other thing is rotate insecticides classes just to delay that development, to keep these insecticides in our toolbox as long as we possibly can. The other key message that I want to give to you is to make sure to scout a field after an application. Use insecticides at threshold when threshold is reached. That's very important to use that to make field observations and use the scouting. Scouting is an important part of this. So use it only when thresholds are reached, and then if an insecticide is applied, always go in and scout the field again to notice if there, observe if there is a crop, is it, if there is a failure in control. Because that's when, if there is a failure in control, that you could stop it right there and delay resistance at that time. Because if you wait too long, the whole population becomes resistant, and then it's very difficult to work with it. So those are my key messages that I have. And thank you for listening. And you can contact me anytime. This is my email address, my phone number, and if ever you have a question, just be free to contact me.
We really appreciate that, and we really appreciate your presentation, Christine. Now, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and we already have a few in the queue. We'll start. Um, are Colorado potato beetles vectors for any important diseases?
They they're not really a vector as such, but they can do some mechanical transmission, but they're not really a vector of any diseases.
That's interesting. And Khalil asked quite early in the presentation, which stages of the Colorado potato beetle cause most damage, fourth instar or the adults?
It's the fourth instar causes a lot of damage, and the summer adults that come out after the fourth instar pupate and they come out, because it's the third and the fourth instar that cause a huge amount of damage, and the summer adults.
Now, this attendee asks, the San Luis Valley in Colorado does not have Colorado potato beetle. Any thoughts on why?
Do they grow a lot of potatoes there?
Could be.
I know they were found. I don't know. I had no thoughts on that because I know that's where they were identified from, but they were on the buffalo burr. So I don't know if they are still on buffalo burr. It would be really neat to go and check to see if they do have if they are still on buffalo burr instead of moving to potatoes.
Hmm. Now, this person asked something that might also be an interesting question to follow up with Erica and Vanessa asking, is there much scope for breeding new varieties that are less appealing to Colorado potato beetle?
Yeah, yeah. So this is part of the breeding program. They always look at potato beetles, and I think a lot of the breeding, and Erica did speak about it, that they do look at their lines to see if they are resistant. So there are some, you do see some where they like them, but they don't really like them if given a choice. So there is something there. So, like, yeah, breeding programs are always look at potato beetles because of the nature of this insect.
Yes. And Abdul asks, what would be the economic impact of beetles and control devices, beetle control devices or systems on the per unit market price of potato?
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you that. I'll have
Those
to do a
are
big
the fun.
economic study to give you that information. Yeah.
Yes, and I know there was one outstanding question from Vikram's presentation, which I have saved. The person who had asked if Vikram could elaborate on Colorado potato beetle and whether or not it's a more prominent pest in some growing regions across Canada than others, and is that related to the climate?
Yeah, it is, because in some regions it doesn't get really cold. Now the potato beetle, it overwinters in the soil, underground. So if it's in areas where it's really cold, and it gets there's a frost that goes really deep, it could kill them,
Mm.
depending on the frost. frost in the ground. And in some areas, the like here in PEI this year, I found no frost in the ground yet. So, we have a snow cover, there's no frost in the ground. So you have more higher survival because of that. And it's also the temperature and the humidity and all that. That all impacts insects are really impacted by temperature,
Mhm.
humidity, those aspects. So yes, there are areas where they will thrive better than others, but they are quite resilient insects.
This next question, is there any, oh, this is great. This is for organic farmers. Is there any additional research going into biological control for Colorado potato beetles for organic farms?
Well, all the biologicals that I spoke about, like the predators and the nematodes and the Bavaria bassiana, those are all those all can be used in organic systems.
Mhm. Great. And Brent asked, any work on RNAi for potato beetles?
Yes, there is some work. There's quite a bit of work being done on RNAi, and there is something that's out there with RNAi. So there is work being done, and with RNAi and how to use it for potato beetles.
Excellent. Well, we currently still have 4 minutes left and no questions. I'll give us a couple more moments and see if anyone
Sure.
has anything additional. As a reminder, please type it in the Q&A and not in the chat. And if we do happen to run out of time, Christine did share her email and her phone number. Also, as a reminder to anyone watching today that within the coming days after this presentation, these segments will be uploaded onto our website, and we'll be pushing that out throughout our website and social media. Speaking of social media, if you are tweeting or posting anywhere about the day, the hashtag is Potato Summit, and take the opportunity to follow us on our new LinkedIn page as well. Well, as it is currently 12:12, we'll give a couple more moments before we get on to our final segment of the day. You fielded through those questions so quickly.
I did.
You did, yes.
Yeah. Potato
Well,
beetles are very interesting. They're very
they are.
interesting, and they are quite the insect, and cause are a big problem for growers. Trying to control them is a big issue for a lot of growers, and right across Canada, and even in Europe and in the United States. In Europe they don't have the insecticides that we have registered, so it's even a bigger issue there. But if you grow potatoes, you have potato beetles.
Yes, and it's interesting the various ways in which they can cause damage too. They really are little opportunists.
Yes.
Well, it looks like that you have successfully answered all the questions, and we really appreciate that. So thank
Okay.
you very much, Christine, for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.